The rain hammered against the cracked window of the small, dingy apartment where 7-year-old Maya sat curled in the corner of her makeshift bed. Her stomach growled loudly, a sound that had become her constant companion over the past 3 days. The thin blanket she clutched barely covered her frail body, and her dark eyes, once bright with childhood wonder, now held the hollow look of someone far older than her years. Maya's Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim had taken her in 2 years ago after her parents died in a car accident. At first, she had been grateful for a place to stay, hoping that these relatives would fill the void left by her loving mother and father. But that hope had quickly turned to despair as she realized that to them, she was nothing more than a burden and a source of the monthly government assistance check that came with her care. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with perpetually angry eyes and a sharp tongue, spent most of her days drinking cheap wine and complaining about everything wrong with her life. She blamed Maya for their financial troubles, even though the child support money was supposed to help with Maya's needs. Instead, Sarah used it to buy cigarettes and alcohol, leaving Maya to survive on whatever scraps she could find. Uncle Jim worked sporadically at a construction site, but most of his earnings went toward his gambling addiction. He rarely spoke to Maya directly, but when he did, his words were harsh and cruel. He would tell her she was worthless, that she was the reason they couldn't have nice things, and that she should be grateful they didn't throw her out on the streets. Maya learned early to stay quiet and invisible. She would wake up before dawn and tiptoe around the apartment, trying not to disturb her guardians. The refrigerator was always locked with a chain and padlock, and the cupboards were kept sealed with duct tape. Sarah would dole out small portions of food at irregular intervals, often forgetting to feed Maya for entire days. At school, Maya tried to act normal, but her teachers began to notice her declining health and frequent absences. Her clothes were always dirty and too small, her hair unwashed and tangled. She would fall asleep in class from exhaustion and wake up embarrassed when other children stared at her. During lunchtime, she would sit alone while other children ate their packed meals or bought food from the cafeteria. Maya learned to drink lots of water from the school fountain to fill her empty stomach. The school nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, had tried to help Maya several times. She would call Maya to her office and gently ask about her home life, but Maya was too scared to tell the truth. Sarah had warned her repeatedly that if she ever complained to anyone about her treatment, they would send her to an orphanage where terrible things happen to children. Maya believed these threats and remained silent, even when Mrs. Rodriguez offered her granola bars and asked if she was getting enough to eat at home. Maya's only comfort came from a small, torn photograph she kept hidden in her backpack. It showed her with her parents during happier times, all three of them smiling at a park on a sunny day. Her mother had been beautiful and kind, always making sure Maya felt loved and secure. Her father had been strong and protective, carrying Maya on his shoulders and reading her bedtime stories every night. Sometimes, Maya would stare at this picture and try to remember their voices, their hugs, and the way they made her feel safe. One particularly cold November day, Maya came home from school to find Sarah in one of her worst moods. She had been drinking since morning and was angry because the welfare office had called asking about Maya's school attendance. Sarah grabbed Maya by the arm and shook her violently, demanding to know what she had told people at school. Maya trembled and insisted she hadn't said anything wrong, but Sarah didn't believe her. As punishment, Sarah locked Maya in the small, dark closet where they kept old coats and broken furniture. The space was cramped and smelled of mold and mothballs. Maya could barely stand up straight, and there was no light except for the thin line that came from under the door. She spent 3 hours in that closet, crying softly and begging to be let out. When Sarah finally opened the door, Maya was dizzy and weak. Without any explanation, Sarah handed her a single piece of stale bread and told her that would be her dinner. Maya ate it gratefully, even though it was hard and tasted awful. That night, Maya lay on her thin mattress and listened to Sarah and Jim arguing in the next room. They were fighting about money again, and Maya heard Sarah say that taking care of Maya was too much trouble for the small amount they received. Jim agreed and suggested they look into other options for Maya's care. Maya's heart pounded as she realized they were planning to get rid of her. The next morning brought no breakfast, and Maya went to school with her stomach cramping from hunger. During math class, she felt dizzy and had trouble concentrating on the teacher's lesson. Her friend Jenny, who sat next to her, noticed Maya looked pale and offered to share her apple slices during snack time. Maya wanted to accept, but was too proud to admit how hungry she was. At recess, Maya sat under a large oak tree and watched other children playing happily on the playground. She thought about her parents and wondered if they were watching over her from heaven. She wished desperately that they would somehow come back and take her away from this nightmare. Maya closed her eyes and tried to imagine her mother's warm arms around her, protecting her from all the pain and fear. When Maya returned home that afternoon, she found a social worker waiting in the living room with Sarah and Jim. The woman, Ms. Peterson, had kind eyes and spoke gently to Maya, asking about her health and schooling. Maya was terrified to answer honestly, remembering Sarah's warnings about what would happen if she complained. She gave short, careful answers while Sarah glared at her from across the room. After Ms. Peterson left, Sarah exploded with rage. She accused Maya of bringing trouble to their family and said she was tired of dealing with an ungrateful child. As punishment, Sarah decided Maya would not be allowed to eat dinner that night or breakfast the next morning. Maya accepted this punishment silently, having learned that arguing only made things worse. That evening, Maya sat in her corner and looked out the window at the neighboring houses. She could see families inside, eating dinner together and watching television. Children were doing homework while their parents helped them or prepared snacks. Maya longed to be part of a real family again, to have someone who cared whether she was hungry or cold or scared. The next day at school was particularly difficult. Maya's stomach hurt so badly she could barely walk, and her vision kept getting blurry. During art class, she fainted while standing at the easel and was taken to the nurse's office. Mrs. Rodriguez was very concerned and called Sarah to come pick Maya up, but Sarah claimed she was too busy and couldn't leave work. Mrs. Rodriguez stayed with Maya until the end of the school day, giving her crackers and orange juice to help her feel better. She asked Maya detailed questions about her eating habits and home life, but Maya stuck to the stories Sarah had taught her. She said she had just forgotten to eat breakfast and was feeling better now. Walking home from school, Maya moved slowly, stopping several times to rest. The November air was getting colder, and she only had a thin jacket to keep her warm. Her shoes had holes in them, and her feet were freezing. Maya wondered how much longer she could endure this life and whether anyone would ever truly care about what happened to her. When Maya reached her street, she saw several cars parked outside her building, including a police car. Her heart began racing as she wondered what was happening. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and found the door wide open. Inside, police officers were talking to Sarah and Jim, who both looked angry and nervous. Maya learned that Mrs. Rodriguez had filed a report with Child Protective Services after Maya's fainting incident at school. The authorities were investigating the living conditions and treatment of children in the household. Maya was questioned separately by a police officer who asked about her daily routine, what she ate, and how Sarah and Jim treated her. For the first time, Maya felt a spark of hope that someone might actually help her. But she was also terrified of what Sarah might do to her if the investigation didn't result in her removal from the home. That night, Sarah made it clear that if Maya had said anything negative about them, she would make Maya's life even more miserable than it already was. Maya spent that night awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen next. She clutched her parents' photograph and whispered a prayer that somehow, somewhere, there was someone who might actually want to take care of her. She had almost given up hope that such a person existed, but deep in her heart, she still believed that good people were out there. The investigation continued for several days, with social workers visiting the apartment and asking neighbors about Maya's situation. Maya tried to remain hopeful, but each day that passed without change made her more discouraged. Sarah and Jim became increasingly hostile toward her, blaming her for bringing unwanted attention to their household. Maya's situation seemed hopeless, and she began to believe that this nightmare would never end. She was just a small girl in a big world, forgotten and unwanted by the very people who were supposed to protect her. But, unknown to Maya, her story was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything. Thomas Mitchell walked slowly through the grocery store aisles, his weathered hands pushing a cart that contained only the bare essentials. At 52 years old, He had learned to live on very little since losing his job at the factory 6 months ago. His wife Elena had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, leaving him alone in their small house with nothing but memories and mounting bills. Thomas had once been a man of means, working as a supervisor at the local manufacturing plant for over 20 years. He and Elena had lived comfortably, though they had never been blessed with children despite trying for many years. Elena's medical bills had drained their savings, and now unemployment had pushed Thomas to the edge of financial ruin. He was behind on his mortgage payments and survived mainly on unemployment benefits that barely covered his basic needs. The house felt empty without Elena's laughter and warmth. Thomas often found himself talking to her photograph, asking for guidance and strength to get through each difficult day. He had considered selling the house and moving somewhere smaller, but it was the only place where he still felt connected to his beloved wife. Every room held precious memories of their life together. Thomas was a kind man with gentle blue eyes and graying hair that he kept neatly combed despite his struggles. Neighbors knew him as someone who would always lend a helping hand, even when he had little to offer. Before Elena's illness, they had been active in their church and community, volunteering at food banks and helping families in need. Now Thomas found himself on the other side of charity, too proud to ask for help, but desperately needing it. On this particular cold November evening, Thomas was walking home from the grocery store with 2 small bags of discounted items he could afford. As he passed by the apartment building on Maple Street, he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks. It was the sound of a child crying, not the loud tantrum of an upset child, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of someone who had given up hope. Thomas looked up toward the second floor of the building where the crying seemed to be coming from. Through a dimly lit window, he could see the small silhouette of a child sitting alone. Something about the scene tugged at his heart, reminding him of the children he and Elena had always hoped to have. He stood there for several minutes, listening to the soft weeping and feeling an overwhelming urge to help. The next morning, Thomas found himself walking past the same building on his way to the unemployment office. Again, he heard crying from the same window. This time, he decided to investigate further. He went to the building's front entrance and looked at the directory. Apartment 2B was listed under the names Sarah and James Peterson. Thomas didn't recognize these names, but he made a mental note of the apartment number. Throughout the week, Thomas found reasons to walk past the building at different times of day. He began to notice patterns that troubled him deeply. He would see a small girl with tangled hair and dirty clothes walking to school alone, looking much thinner and sadder than any child should look. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of her sitting by the window, staring outside with a vacant expression that broke his heart. Thomas had worked with enough families over the years to recognize signs of neglect and abuse. His own difficult childhood with an alcoholic father had made him sensitive to the suffering of children. He remembered what it felt like to be hungry, scared, and alone, and he couldn't bear to see another child experiencing the same pain. One rainy Thursday evening, Thomas was returning from a job interview that hadn't gone well when he heard shouting coming from apartment 2B. A woman's voice was screaming angrily, followed by the sound of something crashing. Then came the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Thomas stood in the hallway, his hands clenched into fists as he struggled with whether to intervene. Elena had always been the brave one, the one who would speak up when something wasn't right. Thomas found himself asking what she would do in this situation. He knew she would want him to help this child, regardless of the personal cost or complications it might bring to his already difficult life. Thomas went home that night and couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the little girl and wondering what she was enduring behind that door. He had seen her guardians a few times, a heavy-set woman who always looked angry, and a thin man who seemed to avoid eye contact with everyone. Neither of them appeared to show any affection or care for the child they were supposed to be protecting. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that would change both his life and Maya's forever. He called the Child Protective Services hotline and reported his concerns about the child in apartment 2B. He described what he had observed: the crying, the shouting, the child's apparent neglect, and malnourishment. The social worker who took his call, Ms. Peterson, told him they would investigate the situation. Several days passed before Thomas saw any activity around the apartment building. When the investigation began, he watched from across the street as police cars and social workers arrived. He felt both hopeful that the child might get help and worried about what would happen if the authorities didn't take action. Thomas learned from neighbors that the little girl's name was Maya and that she had been living with her aunt and uncle since her parents died in an accident. The neighbors admitted they had noticed troubling signs, but hadn't known what to do about them. Some felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, while others claimed it wasn't their business to interfere in family matters. During the investigation period, Thomas made it his routine to walk past the building each morning and evening. He wanted to make sure Maya was safe and to see if there were any changes in her situation. What he observed continued to trouble him deeply. The child looked increasingly frail and frightened, often standing at the window with tears streaming down her face. One evening, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. He bought a small bag of groceries, fruit, crackers, and a warm sandwich from the deli, and went to apartment 2B. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding as he prepared to confront Maya's guardians directly. Sarah answered the door with obvious irritation, asking what he wanted. Thomas introduced himself as a neighbor and said he had noticed the little girl seemed upset and wondered if there was anything he could do to help. Sarah became immediately defensive and hostile, telling him to mind his own business and threatening to call the police if he bothered them again. Through the partially open door, Thomas caught a glimpse of Maya sitting on the floor in the background. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, and Thomas felt his heart break completely. The child was clearly malnourished and scared, wearing clothes that were too small and dirty. In that brief moment, their eyes met, and Thomas saw a flicker of hope in Maya's expression, as if she recognized that someone finally cared about her well-being. Sarah slammed the door in Thomas's face, but that moment of eye contact with Maya had sealed his determination to help her. He went home and called the social worker handling Maya's case, providing additional details about what he had observed and offering to serve as a witness if needed. Ms. Peterson, the social worker, explained that while they were investigating the situation, it was difficult to remove children from homes without clear evidence of abuse or neglect. She said Maya had not disclosed any mistreatment during their interviews, which was common with frightened children who had been threatened or coerced into silence. Thomas asked what would happen to Maya if she were removed from her current guardians. Ms. Peterson explained that she would likely be placed in foster care, but there was a shortage of good foster families, especially for older children. Many kids ended up in group homes or with families who were only interested in the monthly payments rather than the children's well-being. That night, Thomas sat in his living room looking at a photograph of Elena on their wedding day. She was smiling radiantly, full of hope and dreams for their future together. He remembered how much she had wanted children and how she had often talked about adopting if they couldn't have biological children. They had discussed it seriously several times, but Elena's illness had put those plans on hold permanently. Thomas realized that helping Maya wasn't just about saving a child in need. It was also about honoring Elena's memory and the love they had hoped to give to a child of their own. Despite his financial struggles and uncertain future, Thomas knew he had enough love to offer Maya the home she deserved. The next morning, Thomas called Ms. Peterson again and asked about the possibility of becoming a foster parent for Maya. The social worker was surprised by his request and explained the extensive background checks, home inspections, and training requirements involved in becoming a foster parent. She also mentioned that his current financial situation might be considered a barrier to approval. Thomas didn't let these obstacles discourage him. He had lived through his wife's death, the loss of his job, and the threat of losing his home. Compared to those challenges, navigating the foster care system seemed manageable. He was determined to give Maya the safe, loving home she needed, even if it meant sacrificing his own comfort and security. Over the next several days, Thomas threw himself into the process of becoming a qualified foster parent. He attended information sessions, filled out extensive paperwork, and prepared for the required background checks. He also began making improvements to his house, using his limited savings to create a bedroom that would be suitable for a child. Meanwhile, the investigation into Maya's living situation was reaching a critical point. The evidence of neglect was mounting, and Ms. Peterson was preparing to recommend Maya's removal from her current guardians. When she mentioned to Thomas that a placement decision would be made soon, he felt both excited and terrified about the possibility of caring for this traumatized child. Thomas had never been a father, and he worried about his ability to help Maya heal from her terrible experiences. But every time he doubted himself, He remembered the look in Maya's eyes when she saw him at the door, that brief flash of hope that had convinced him he was meant to help her. Elena had always believed that everything happened for a reason, and Thomas was beginning to think that maybe his path had led him to Maya for a purpose. Two people who had lost everything they held dear might be able to find healing and happiness together, creating the family that both of them desperately needed. The morning of December 15th started like any other for Maya, with the familiar pang of hunger and the cold draft from the cracked window. She had no idea that this day would mark the end of her nightmare and the beginning of a completely new chapter in her young life. Maya sat by the window, watching the snow fall gently outside, when she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs followed by several knocks on the apartment door. Sarah answered with her usual irritation, but this time Maya heard different voices, official-sounding people who spoke with authority. Ms. Peterson, the social worker, had returned with 2 police officers and a court order for Maya's immediate removal from the home. The investigation had revealed evidence of severe neglect, financial exploitation of Maya's support funds, and an environment that posed serious risks to her health and safety. Maya watched in confusion and fear as Sarah screamed at the officials, claiming they had no right to take Maya away. Uncle Jim stood silently in the corner, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Maya didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could sense that something important was changing. When Ms. Peterson knelt down and gently explained that Maya would be coming with her to a safer place, Maya felt both terrified and cautiously hopeful. Within an hour, Maya's few possessions were packed into a small garbage bag. Her torn clothes, her precious photograph of her parents, and a small stuffed rabbit that had been her mother's gift on her 5th birthday. As they prepared to leave, Sarah made one final cruel comment, telling Maya that nobody would ever really want her, and that she would end up back in the system where she belonged. The ride to the social services office was quiet, except for Ms. Peterson's gentle attempts at conversation. Maya stared out the window at the familiar neighborhood disappearing behind them, feeling a mixture of relief and uncertainty about what would happen next. She had dreamed of leaving Sarah and Jim's apartment countless times, but now that it was actually happening, she felt scared of the unknown future ahead. At the social services office, Maya sat in a small room with colorful posters on the walls while Ms. Peterson made several phone calls. Maya could hear fragments of conversations about placement options and availability, and she began to understand that they were trying to find somewhere for her to live. Her heart sank as she imagined being sent to another home where she might not be wanted or cared for properly. After what felt like hours, Ms. Peterson returned with a gentle smile and some surprising news. She explained that a kind man named Thomas had expressed interest in becoming Maya's foster parent. He lived in a small house not far from her school, and he had been working very hard to prepare a safe and welcoming home for her. Ms. Peterson showed Maya a photo of Thomas, and Maya recognized him immediately as the man who had come to Sarah's door and looked at her with such kindness in his eyes. Maya's first reaction was disbelief. Why would this stranger want to take care of her when her own relatives had found her such a burden? Ms. Peterson patiently explained that some people simply wanted to help children who needed safe homes, and that Thomas seemed to be one of those special people. She assured Maya that if she didn't feel comfortable with Thomas, they would continue looking for other options. The drive to Thomas's house was short but felt monumental to Maya. She pressed her face against the window, taking in the tree-lined streets and modest houses with their small front yards. When they pulled into the driveway of a white house with blue shutters, Maya saw Thomas waiting on the front porch. He looked nervous but smiled warmly when he saw her. Thomas approached the car slowly, clearly wanting to avoid overwhelming Maya. He introduced himself again and told her how happy he was that she was going to stay with him. His voice was gentle and patient, and Maya noticed that his eyes were kind rather than angry like the adult she had been living with. When he offered to help carry her bag, Maya hesitantly allowed him to take it from her. The inside of Thomas's house was nothing like the chaotic, dirty apartment Maya was used to. It was clean and organized with comfortable furniture and warm lighting. The walls were decorated with photographs of Thomas and a beautiful woman with a gentle smile, who Thomas explained was his wife Elena, who had passed away. Maya studied Elena's face in the pictures and thought she looked like the kind of mother she remembered from her dreams. Thomas showed Maya to what would be her bedroom, and she gasped in amazement. It was a small but cozy room with pale yellow walls, white furniture, and a bed covered with a soft comforter decorated with flowers. There was a bookshelf filled with children's books, a desk for homework, and even a window seat with cushions where she could sit and read. Thomas had clearly spent a lot of time and effort preparing this space specifically for her. Maya stood in the doorway for a long time, unable to believe that this beautiful room was really meant for her. Thomas gently explained that everything in a room was hers to use and enjoy, and that she could arrange things however she liked. When Maya asked if she was really allowed to sleep in the bed, Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he realized how little kindness this child had experienced. The first few days in Thomas's home were an adjustment for both of them. Maya was naturally cautious and spent a lot of time quietly observing her new environment. She would sit in corners and watch Thomas go about his daily routines, trying to determine what was expected of her and whether this kindness was real or temporary. Thomas, meanwhile, was learning how to care for a traumatized child and try not to overwhelm her with too much attention too quickly. Thomas quickly noticed Maya's fear around food and mealtimes. She would eat very quickly, as if someone might take her plate away at any moment, and she would try to hide food in her pockets for later. Thomas realized that Maya had learned to hoard food as a survival mechanism, and he began leaving small snacks around the house to help her understand that food would always be available when she was hungry. The first time Thomas offered to cook Maya's favorite meal, she looked at him in confusion and said she didn't know what her favorite meal was. She had been given so little food for so long that she had never had the opportunity to develop preferences. Thomas made it his mission to help Maya discover which food she enjoyed, preparing different meals each day and encouraging her to try new things without any pressure. Maya's relationship with Thomas developed slowly but steadily. She began to notice small acts of kindness that she had never experienced before. Thomas would ask about her day at school and actually listen to her answers. He would help her with homework without getting angry if she didn't understand something immediately. He would read her stories before bed and tuck her in with the same gentle care she remembered from her parents. One evening, about 2 weeks after Maya's arrival, she became very sick with a fever. In the past, Sarah had ignored Maya's illnesses or complained about the inconvenience they caused. Maya expected Thomas to be angry with her for getting sick, but instead he immediately sprang into action. He took her temperature, called the doctor, and spent the entire night sitting by her bedside with cool cloth for her forehead and gentle words of comfort. When Maya woke up the next morning feeling better, she found Thomas asleep in the chair beside her bed, having watched over her all night. This act of selfless care broke down another wall in Maya's heart, and she began to believe that Thomas truly cared about her well-being. She timidly reached out and touched his hand, and when Thomas woke up and smiled at her with relief, Maya felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since her parents died. Christmas was approaching, and Thomas asked Maya if she would like to help him decorate the house for the holidays. Maya had not experienced a real Christmas celebration in 2 years, and she wasn't sure what was expected of her. Thomas patiently showed her how to hang ornaments on the tree and string lights around the windows, sharing stories about how he and Elena used to celebrate Christmas together. Thomas had used some of his limited savings to buy Maya a few Christmas presents, but he was most excited about giving her something that couldn't be wrapped. He had been working with Ms. Peterson to begin the process of legally adopting Maya, wanting to give her the permanent family she deserved. While the adoption process would take time, Thomas was committed to being Maya's father in every way that mattered. On Christmas morning, Maya woke up to find several wrapped presents under the tree with her name on them. She approached them cautiously, still not entirely believing they were really for her. Thomas encouraged her to open them, and Maya discovered new clothes that actually fit her, a beautiful doll with long dark hair like her own, and several books that Thomas thought she might enjoy reading. But the most meaningful gift was one Maya gave to Thomas without realizing it. After opening her presents, she quietly approached him and whispered, "Thank you, Papa Thomas." It was the first time she had called him anything other than Mr. Thomas, and hearing that word, Papa, filled his heart with more joy than he had felt since Elena's passing. Maya's progress in school began to improve dramatically once she had stable housing and regular meals. Her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, noticed that Maya was more alert in class and had stopped falling asleep at her desk. Maya's grades improved, and she began participating in class discussions for the first time. Mrs. Rodriguez, the school nurse, was overjoyed to see Maya looking healthier and happier each week. Thomas made it a priority to attend every school event and parent-teacher conference, something Maya had never experienced before. When Maya's class had a science fair, Thomas helped her create a project about plants and their growth requirements. When she had a school play, Thomas sat in the front row cheering her on. Maya began to understand what it felt like to have someone who was truly proud of her accomplishments. The house that had once felt empty and lonely to Thomas began to feel like a real home again. Maya's laughter echoed through the rooms, and her artwork decorated the refrigerator. Thomas found himself looking forward to each day, excited to see Maya's continued growth and healing. He knew that Elena would have loved Maya deeply, and he often felt her presence guiding him as he learned to be the father Maya needed. By spring, Maya had transformed from the frightened, malnourished child Thomas had first glimpsed through the apartment window into a confident, thriving little girl. She had gained weight, her eyes sparkled with life again, and she had begun to trust that she was safe and loved. The journey hadn't been easy for either of them, but together they had created something beautiful from their shared experiences of loss and hope. Maya still carried some scars from her traumatic experiences, and she occasionally had nightmares or moments of anxiety. But now she had Thomas to comfort her during difficult times, and she had learned that asking for help was a sign of strength rather than weakness. Thomas, meanwhile, had discovered that opening his heart to Maya had helped heal his own grief and given his life new purpose and meaning. 6 months had passed since Maya moved in with Thomas, and their daily routines had settled into a comfortable rhythm that brought both of them joy and stability. Maya would wake up each morning to the smell of pancakes or eggs cooking in the kitchen, a luxury she still couldn't quite believe was real. Thomas had learned to prepare her lunch the night before, always including a special note telling her to have a wonderful day or reminding her how proud he was of her progress in school. Thomas had finally found a new job working part-time at the local hardware store, thanks to a recommendation from his neighbor who had noticed how well he had been caring for Maya. The pay wasn't much, but combined with the foster care assistance and his careful budgeting, they were able to live comfortably. More importantly, the flexible schedule allowed Thomas to be home when Maya returned from school each day, something both of them treasured. Maya's personality continued to blossom in the safe environment Thomas had created for her. She had developed a love for reading and would spend hours curled up in the window seat of her bedroom, lost in stories about brave children going on adventures. Thomas had started taking her to the library every Saturday morning, and Maya had become friends with Mrs. Chun, the children's librarian who always had new book recommendations waiting for her. The adoption process was moving forward slowly but steadily. Thomas had completed all the required classes and home studies, and Maya had expressed her strong desire to become his daughter legally and permanently. The social worker had noted in her reports that Maya had made remarkable progress in every area of her development since moving in with Thomas, and that their bond was clearly genuine and strong. Maya had started calling Thomas Papa regularly now, and each time she said it, Thomas felt his heart swell with pride and love. He had begun teaching her about Elena through the many photographs and mementos he had saved from their marriage. Maya loved hearing stories about Elena's kindness and generosity, and she often said she wished she could have met her. Thomas would tell her that Elena was watching over both of them and would be so happy to see how well Maya was doing. School had become a source of joy rather than stress for Maya. Her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, had entered one of Maya's short stories in a district-wide writing contest, and Maya had won second place. When Thomas attended the award ceremony and watched Maya walk across the stage to receive her certificate, he felt overwhelmed with pride. That night, they celebrated by going out for ice cream, and Maya talked excitedly about wanting to become a writer when she grew up. Maya had also made her first real friend at school, a girl named Sophie whose family had recently moved to town. Sophie's mother, Jennifer, had invited Maya to several playdates, and the two women had become friends as well. Jennifer often commented on how lucky Maya was to have found such a devoted father in Thomas, and how obvious it was that they belonged together. One evening in late spring, Maya was helping Thomas prepare dinner when she suddenly became very quiet. Thomas noticed her change in mood and gently asked what was troubling her. After a long pause, Maya asked if Thomas would ever get tired of taking care of her and send her away like her aunt and uncle had wanted to do. The question broke Thomas's heart, and he immediately sat down with Maya to have a serious conversation. Thomas looked directly into Maya's eyes and told her that she was his daughter now, not just legally but in his heart, and that nothing would ever change that. He explained that families sometimes face challenges and difficult times, but that didn't mean they stop loving each other or give up on each other. He promised Maya that no matter what happened in their lives, she would always have a home with him, and he would always be her papa. To help Maya understand the permanence of their relationship, Thomas decided to do something special. He had been saving money for several months, and he used it to hire a photographer to take professional family portraits of him and Maya. When the pictures came back, they showed a father and daughter who clearly belonged together, both of them glowing with happiness and love. Thomas had the largest portrait framed and hung it prominently in the living room, right next to his wedding photo with Elena. He wanted Maya to see every day that she was an important and permanent part of their family story. Maya stared at the photo for a long time the first time she saw it, and Thomas noticed tears in her eyes. When he asked if she was sad, Maya shook her head and said she was crying because she was so happy to finally have a real family again. The summer brought new adventures for Thomas and Maya. Thomas had managed to save enough money for them to take a camping trip to the state park where he and Elena had honeymooned many years earlier. Maya had never been camping before, and she was both excited and nervous about sleeping in a tent and cooking over a campfire. The camping trip turned out to be a wonderful bonding experience for both of them. Thomas taught Maya how to set up their tent, identify different types of birds and trees, and make s'mores over the campfire. Maya showed Thomas that she was braver and more adventurous than either of them had realized, eagerly exploring nature trails and asking endless questions about the wildlife they encountered. On their last night camping, Thomas and Maya lay on a blanket outside their tent looking up at the stars. Maya pointed out the constellations Thomas had taught her to recognize, and she made a wish on a shooting star. When Thomas asked what she had wished for, Maya said she had wished for Elena to know how happy she and Thomas were together. Thomas felt his eyes fill with tears as he realized how thoughtful and caring Maya had become, despite all the pain she had experienced in her young life. As autumn approached, Maya started third grade with confidence and excitement. She had grown several inches over the summer and needed new clothes, which Thomas took great pleasure in shopping for with her. Maya was learning to express her preferences and opinions about things like colors and styles, and Thomas loved seeing her personality continue to emerge. Maya's academic performance continued to excel, and she had become particularly gifted in creative writing and art. Her teacher recommended her for the school's gifted and talented program, and Maya was thrilled at the opportunity to work on special projects with other advanced students. Thomas attended every school event and parent conference, beaming with pride at Maya's accomplishments and the confident way she interacted with teachers and classmates. The legal adoption was finally approved in October, almost exactly 1 year after Maya had come to live with Thomas. The court ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with Maya officially becoming Maya Mitchell and Thomas officially becoming her legal father. Ms. Peterson attended the ceremony as a witness, and she later told Thomas that in her 20 years as a social worker, she had rarely seen such a perfect match between a child and a foster parent. After the adoption ceremony, Thomas and Maya celebrated by visiting Elena's grave together for the first time. Maya had asked if they could bring flowers to Elena and tell her about the adoption. At the cemetery, Maya placed a bouquet of yellow roses on Elena's headstone and quietly thanked her for watching over Thomas until Maya could come and take care of him too. Thomas was moved by Maya's mature understanding of their family's story and her generous heart that had room to love Elena even though they had never met. That evening, Maya asked Thomas if they could add Elena's maiden name to her own name, so she could honor both the mother she remembered and the mother who had loved Thomas. They legally changed Maya's name to Maya Elena Mitchell, creating a beautiful connection between past and present. The holidays that year were filled with joy and new traditions. Thomas and Maya decorated their Christmas tree together, and Maya insisted on including a special ornament in Elena's memory. They volunteered together at the local food bank, with Maya eager to help other families who might be struggling like she once had. Maya's empathy and compassion for others had grown stronger as she healed from her own traumatic experiences. Maya's relationship with food had completely transformed over the course of the year. She no longer hoarded snacks or ate quickly out of fear that her meal might be taken away. Instead, she had learned to enjoy cooking with Thomas and had even developed some favorite recipes that she liked to prepare. Thomas loved watching Maya's confidence in the kitchen grow, and he often told her she was becoming quite the little chef. As winter settled in, Thomas and Maya established cozy evening routines that both of them treasured. They would do Maya's homework together at the kitchen table, with Thomas always available to help, but never pushing Maya beyond what she was ready to learn. After homework, they would read together on the couch, sometimes taking turns reading chapters aloud to each other. Maya had begun keeping a journal where she wrote about her daily adventures and thoughts. Sometimes she would share funny stories or interesting observations with Thomas, and he was constantly amazed by her intelligence and creativity. Maya also wrote letters to her birth parents, telling them about her new life and how happy she was with Thomas. Thomas helped her understand that her parents would be proud of how strong and resilient she had become. The house that had once been too quiet and lonely for Thomas had become filled with music, laughter, and the sounds of a happy childhood. Maya's artwork covered the refrigerator and bulletin boards. Her books were scattered throughout the house, and her presence had brought warmth and life to every room. Thomas often found himself stopping to watch Maya playing or reading, still amazed that this wonderful child had become his daughter. Both Thomas and Maya had grown tremendously over their first year together. Thomas had learned to be patient, nurturing, and protective in ways he had never imagined possible. Maya had learned to trust again, to believe in her own worth, and to open her heart to love and be loved. Together, they had created something beautiful from their shared experiences of loss, proving that sometimes the most unexpected families are the strongest ones of all. 2 years had passed since the adoption, and Maya was now 9 years old, thriving in ways that sometimes amazed even Thomas. The shy, frightened child who had once cowered in corners had become a confident, articulate young girl with dreams and ambitions that seemed to grow bigger every day. She had just started 4th grade and was already talking about wanting to attend college to study journalism, inspired by her love of writing and storytelling. Thomas, now 54, had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never imagined possible. His job at the hardware store had led to a promotion to assistant manager, and the steady income had allowed them to make some improvements to the house. They had painted Maya's room in her favorite shade of purple, added a swing set in the backyard, and even adopted a rescue dog named Charlie who had become Maya's constant companion. Maya's academic achievements continued to impress her teachers and classmates. She had won the school's annual writing contest for the 2nd year in a row, this time with a heartwarming story about a little girl who found her forever family through unexpected circumstances. When Maya read her story aloud at the school assembly, Thomas sat in the audience with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with pride at his daughter's talent and resilience. The relationship between Thomas and Maya had deepened into something truly special. They had developed their own inside jokes, traditions, and ways of communicating that outsiders might not understand, but that bonded them together as a true father and daughter. Maya had learned to read Thomas's moods and would often surprise him with small acts of kindness when he was having a difficult day. Thomas, meanwhile, had become expert at knowing exactly what Maya needed, whether it was encouragement, comfort, or simply someone to listen to her endless questions about the world. One spring evening, Maya came home from school with exciting news. Her teacher had recommended her for a summer program for gifted young writers at the nearby university. The program would last 6 weeks and would give Maya the opportunity to work with professional authors and learn advanced writing techniques. Thomas was thrilled for Maya, but also worried about the cost of the program and whether Maya was ready to be away from home for such an extended period. Maya had grown so much in confidence and independence that Thomas realized his concerns were more about his own fears than Maya's abilities. She had proven repeatedly that she could handle new challenges and situations with grace and maturity. After discussing it together and researching the program thoroughly, Thomas decided to find a way to make Maya's participation possible, even if it meant taking on extra work hours or dipping into their modest savings. The summer writing program turned out to be a transformative experience for Maya. She flourished in the creative environment and formed friendships with other young writers who shared her passion for storytelling. When Thomas attended the final presentation where Maya read one of her pieces to an audience of families and program instructors, he felt overwhelmed with pride at how articulate and poised his daughter had become. Maya's piece was a memoir about finding hope after loss, and she dedicated it to Thomas and Elena, thanking them both for teaching her that families can be created through love rather than just biology. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and several of the professional writers approached Thomas afterward to tell him how talented and remarkable Maya was. One author even suggested that Maya had the potential to be published someday if she continued developing her skills. As Maya entered 5th grade, she began showing interest in helping other children who were experiencing difficult situations like she had once faced. She volunteered to help younger students with their reading and often spent recess with children who seemed lonely or left out. Maya's teacher noted that she had a special gift for recognizing when others were struggling and offering comfort and support in age-appropriate ways. Thomas and Maya decided to get involved with a local organization that supported children in foster care. They began attending fundraising events and awareness activities, and Maya even spoke at one event about her own experiences and the importance of finding caring families for children in need. Her speech was so moving that it was featured in the local newspaper, bringing attention to the organization's mission and inspiring other families to consider fostering or adoption. Maya's relationship with her birth parents' memory had evolved into something healthy and healing. She still kept their photograph in her bedroom, and she would sometimes tell Thomas stories she remembered about them or ask questions about what they might think of her accomplishments. Thomas always encouraged Maya to honor her parents' memory while also embracing her present family, helping her understand that loving multiple sets of parents didn't diminish any of those relationships. One autumn day, Maya surprised Thomas with a request that touched his heart deeply. She asked if they could visit Elena's grave on what would have been Elena's birthday, bringing flowers and sharing stories about their life together. Maya had been thinking about Elena more often lately, and felt grateful for the love Elena had given Thomas that had prepared him to be such a wonderful father to her. At the cemetery, Maya placed a bouquet of sunflowers on Elena's headstone and told her about her writing achievements, her dreams for the future, and how happy she and Thomas were together. She thanked Elena for loving Thomas so well and promised to take good care of him for the rest of their lives. Thomas was moved to tears by Maya's maturity and the genuine love she felt for Elena, despite never having met her. As winter approached, Thomas and Maya began planning something special for the 3-year anniversary of Maya's arrival in their home. They decided to create a scrapbook documenting their journey together, filled with photographs, Maya's artwork, and writing samples, school reports, and mementos from their various adventures. Working on the scrapbook together gave them both an opportunity to reflect on how much they had grown and changed since that first difficult day when Maya had arrived with nothing but a garbage bag of belongings. The scrapbook became a treasured family heirloom that told the story of their unconventional but beautiful family. Maya wrote captions for many of the photos, describing her memories and feelings about different moments in their shared history. Thomas contributed his own reflections, often focusing on how Maya had brought joy and purpose back into his life after years of loneliness and grief. Maya's writing continued to develop and mature, and she began working on a longer project, a children's book about a little girl who finds her forever family through unexpected circumstances. She wanted to create a story that might help other children in similar situations feel less alone and more hopeful about their futures. Thomas helped her research the publishing process and connected her with some of the authors she had met during her summer program. The bond between Thomas and Maya had become unbreakable, forged through shared experiences of both hardship and joy. They had learned to depend on each other, support each other, and celebrate each other's achievements and growth. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the comfortable routines of a family that had been tested and had emerged stronger. Maya's confidence and happiness were evident to everyone who knew her. She walked taller, spoke with conviction, and approached new challenges with enthusiasm rather than fear. The traumatized child who had once hidden in corners and hoarded food had been replaced by a vibrant young girl who believed in herself and her ability to achieve her dreams. Thomas often marveled at the journey that had brought him and Maya together. What had started as a simple act of compassion for a suffering child had evolved into the most meaningful relationship of his life. Maya had not just given him the opportunity to be a father. She had given him a reason to live fully again and to believe in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As they looked toward the future, both Thomas and Maya felt excited about the adventures and challenges that lay ahead. Maya was already making plans for middle school and high school, talking about college applications and career goals with the confidence of someone who knew she had unwavering support behind her. Thomas was committed to being there for every milestone, every achievement, and every moment of growth in Maya's life. Their story had begun with abandonment and hunger, with tears and desperation from both a neglected child and a grieving widower. But through their courage to open their hearts to each other, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Thomas and Maya had found in each other not just what they needed, but what they never knew they were searching for: a forever family built on love, trust, and the unshakable belief that they belonged together. The little girl who had once wept by a window, forgotten and unloved, now stood confident and cherished, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. The lonely widower who had lost hope for happiness had discovered that his greatest joy lay not in his past, but in the bright future he was building with his remarkable daughter. Together, Thomas and Maya had proven that sometimes the most unexpected love stories are the most powerful ones of all.